Early in the evening of 8th of April 217 A.D., the rays of the setting sun barely touched the majestic marble walls of the Baths of Caracalla, an architectural marvel designed to offer Roman nobility, pleasure, relaxation, and a sense of prestige. Yet, this evening, there would be no joyous exclamations or animated political debates. In less than an hour, this opulent complex would become the arena for one of history's most meticulously planned and discreet massacres. The mosaic panels, once reflecting the grandeur of the gods, would bear silent witness to imperial paranoia, transforming a temple of well-being into a hall of political executions. The impending events are not mere legend or fiction. They are facts, documented in ancient chronicles and corroborated by modern archaeological research. This is a story where distrust became a deadly weapon and the world's leading civilization revealed its ruthless side. This time, history would not mirror triumph, but rather reflect an all-consuming fear. To understand what transpired that fateful night in the Baths of Caracalla, one must rewind 2 months. It was April 217 A.D. Caracalla, son of Septimius Severus, an emperor who commanded terror with his cruelty and respect with his military might, had been assassinated during a military campaign in Mesopotamia. The immediate culprit was Marcus Opellius Macrinus, the Praetorian prefect, a man of humble origins who had risen to high office not through aristocratic lineage, but through his strategic acumen and exceptional talent for intrigue. Caracalla's demise was no spontaneous incident, but the outcome of a painstakingly devised conspiracy. A network of senators, members of noble houses, and military commanders had secretly pooled their resources, providing financial backing, valuable intelligence, and essential connections. While historical memory has cemented Macrinus's role as the killer, he was not acting alone. Behind him lay an entire web of accomplices, ready to support his ascent to power. However, as is often the case, the fate of conspirators is rarely marked by loyalty and gratitude. Having ascended to the imperial throne, Macrinus found himself facing a complex and perilous dilemma. Those who had been his loyal allies yesterday now possessed too much compromising information. They were privy to the minutest details of the ambush, knew the names of all conspirators, and remembered the betrayals that had paved Macrinus's path to power. Distrust gradually escalated into genuine obsession. Macrinus saw traitors everywhere, shadowy conspirators weaving intrigues even in the most secluded corners of the palace, and like any usurper, he grasped a brutal truth: blood once spilled demands new blood to secure the power that has been seized. Outwardly calm and majestic, Rome was in reality teetering on the brink, gripped by pervasive suspicion and fear. At the very epicenter of this tension, Macrinus began to formulate a cunning plan designed to eliminate all his former associates in a single strike. For the execution of this plan, he chose the Baths of Caracalla, a location as symbolic as it was deadly. In the pre-dawn quiet of 8th of April, while Rome still slept, 15 pillars of society received an imperial summons to appear at the renowned baths bearing Caracalla's name. The imperial seal on the message left no doubt. This was to be a momentous state council, intended to chart the course of a new era. The invited guests represented the cream of Roman aristocracy. Among them was Lucius Cornelius Caepio, whose ancestors had earned glory in battles against Hannibal himself. Gaius Fulvius Plautianus, a powerful merchant whose wealth rivaled the state treasury. Marcus Flavius Quartus, a celebrated veteran of the Germanic campaigns, forged in the crucible of countless battles. and the youngest, Marcus Apellius Macrinus Jr., nephew of the deceased emperor, an unwitting witness to the plot that had ended Caracalla's life. Each of these names harbored a potential threat: immense wealth, noble lineage, political influence, or simply the possession of dangerous knowledge. Macrinus had summoned them not to heed their wise counsel, but to deliver a final verdict. The Baths of Caracalla, with their magnificent architecture, provided the ideal stage for his design. Praetorians could silently take up positions, the massive vaults would muffle cries of despair, and the ingenious drainage system ensured the swift disappearance of any traces. Where others saw only a luxurious temple, Macrinus envisioned a meticulously prepared slaughterhouse. Like moths drawn to a flame, Roman patricians arrived one by one at the opulent baths. Dressed in their finest togas, full of self-importance, they were convinced they were participating in a pivotal council. Some carried scrolls with carefully prepared proposals, others bore family seals to ratify potential agreements. Not one of them could have imagined they were approaching the fatal hour of their lives. As the chosen group gathered in the heart of the Caldarium, surrounded by majestic marble columns and mosaics sparkling in the rising sun, the silence grew profoundly oppressive. A light mist, rising from the hot pools like a ghostly veil, concealed the unseen presence of death. Then a deafening metallic clang announced that the doors were locked. The trap had sprung. This ominous sound, like a funeral bell, echoed through the Caldarium's vaults, instantly plunging everyone into a suffocating silence. Suddenly, from the side corridors, like shadows from the underworld, 50 Praetorians emerged, forming an impenetrable formation. However, in their hands were not swords or spears, but war hammers, tools more suited to executioners than warriors. In an instant, the patricians grasped the terrible truth about the true purpose of this gathering. Instinctively retreating, they stumbled against the cold marble columns. In desperation, they rushed towards the exits, but these were already securely blocked by interlocked shields. The air, once filled with warmth and moisture from the pools, now felt suffocating, almost unbearable. At the center of attention was Centurion Marcus Junius Brutus II, a celebrated veteran with 2 decades of military campaigns behind him, who commanded the operation. His voice, deep and unyielding, resonated through the hall as he pronounced the fatal verdict: "By the will of Emperor Macrinus, you are accused of conspiracy against Rome. The punishment is death, excruciating and inevitable." The first to dare break the silence was Marcus Apellius Macrinus Jr., the emperor's own nephew. He demanded an immediate meeting with his uncle, believing that blood ties would spare him from certain death. However, his protest only hastened the tragic end. The imperial relative was the first to experience the force of justice. Family connections proved powerless against the emperor's will. A powerful hammer blow struck his head, and the sound echoed through the square like a funeral knell. Blood stained the mosaics depicting Olympian gods, transforming a place of luxury into an arena of horror. Panic seized the condemned. Lucius Cornelius Caepio, the embodiment of Republican glory, desperately appealed for a trial by the Senate. In response, he was struck down beside the pool, whose waters turned crimson. "The Republic is long gone. Now the emperor is judge, jury, and executioner in one," came the cruel reply. Some attempted to beg for mercy, others resisted fiercely, while still others froze in terror, unable to utter a single word. But all understood that the caldarium of the baths had become their shared tomb. The bloody massacre had only just begun. The bloodbath unfolded in the caldarium, transforming it into a ritualistic site of sacrifice. Thick steam rising from the pools mingled with blood, forming an ominous mist through which the outlines of bodies were barely discernible. Hammers descended with relentless precision, blow after blow, creating a gruesome symphony of cracking bones and muffled groans. Gaius Fulvius Plautianus, the wealthy merchant, desperately attempted to buy his life, offering immense riches capable of funding an entire army. Yet the soldiers remained unyielding, like stone statues. The order was unequivocal: no leniency, no deals. His shoulder was shattered with the very first blow, and his curses against Macrinus were swallowed by the hollow echo of the marble walls. Marcus Flavius Quartus, a battle-hardened veteran of the Germanic campaign, was the only one to offer worthy resistance. Despite a broken arm, he managed to wrench a hammer from an executioner and crush a praetorian skull before being overpowered and brutally beaten. This desperate flash of defiance did not alter the tragic outcome, but entered history as a symbol of a final assertion of dignity. The youngest of the condemned, Quintus Fabius Vibulanus, barely 19, was forced to witness this horrific slaughter to its very end. His childlike pleas for his mother sharply contrasted with the cold discipline of the executioners. He was deliberately kept alive to bear witness to each execution and comprehend the fate that awaited him. And only when the last of his companions had fallen did a hammer descend upon his head, bringing the bloody drama to a close. In the hall, which usually exuded cleanliness and serenity, a terrible transformation had occurred. The marble floor, a symbol of luxury and refinement, was defiled by streams of blood. The water in the pools, created for bathing and relaxation, had turned into a sinister crimson mirror, reflecting fragments of torn garments and shattered bodily remains. The intricate mosaic panels depicting mythological scenes and heroic deeds now seemed to mock the victims, stained by ominous puddles slowly vanishing down the drains. For 47 minutes, the emperor's loyal soldiers, like merciless executioners, methodically and dispassionately carried out their duty, allowing no one to escape their predetermined fate. When the last cry of agony faded, the ensuing silence was more sinister than the chaos that had preceded it. However, this bloody massacre was not yet complete. The most dreadful part was still to come. After the last echo of suffering dissolved beneath the magnificent dome, Centurion Brutus II gave the signal for the next phase of the operation. Emperor Macrinus's order was crystal clear: the bodies were to be mutilated beyond recognition. It was not enough merely to take lives. The very identity of each aristocrat had to be erased, their memory torn from the annals of Rome. For nearly 2 hours, the praetorians, with chilling calm and methodical precision, tortured the lifeless bodies. Skulls were reduced to shattered fragments, faces to formless masks. Chests were torn open, exposing internal organs. Only the family signet rings, carefully removed from bloodied fingers, escaped destruction. They served as the sole testimony to the tragedy that had occurred, and the only trophy Macrinus permitted to be kept. The bloodbath in the caldarium had transformed the place into a scene of true apocalypse. The magnificent mosaics were shattered, the columns defiled, and streams of blood flowed into the drains intended for innocent thermal water. The heavy steam, permeated with the nauseating metallic scent of blood, was so dense that even hardened soldiers were forced to cover their faces with wine-soaked cloths to endure the unbearable atmosphere. 3 days later, a massive cleanup operation began. Over 100 specially trained slaves, brought from the city's outskirts, toiled relentlessly under threat of immediate death. They used powerful acids, imported from Egypt itself, to dissolve the ingrained bloodstains on the noble marble. Human remains were ruthlessly dumped into closed wagons and transported to crematoria located on the outskirts of Rome. There, the ashes were mixed with lime and mercilessly cast into the river Tiber, forever obliterating any physical traces of the brutally murdered. After the thorough cleaning, the baths reappeared to the public, seemingly untouched. The mosaics gleamed, the marble sparkled with purity, and the water was once again crystal clear. However, beneath this ostentatious splendor, the entire Roman Empire began to sense an ominous premonition. Macrinus wasted no time in preparing the official version of events. The patricians, he claimed, were dangerous conspirators, and their execution had averted an imminent civil war. This lie was as meticulously planned as the bloody massacre itself. At first glance, Macrinus's strategy seemed flawless. Bodies destroyed, ashes scattered, mosaics sparkling as if nothing had happened. But there was one undeniable fact that could not be concealed: the simultaneous disappearance of 15 of Rome's most influential men. Empty seats in the Senate gaped, a stark reminder of the tragedy. The names of ancient families who had left an indelible mark on the Republic's history suddenly ceased to be heard in assemblies, as if they had never existed. News of the tragedy spread through Rome like wildfire. How could the disappearance of so many noble families overnight be explained? Emperor Macrinus reacted immediately. Just 3 days after the bloody massacre, his edicts were dispatched to every corner of the empire. The official statement asserted that the 15 patricians had been caught plotting to restore the Severan dynasty. Their execution was presented as a preventive measure necessary to protect the state. In the squares and forums, imperial heralds read out the decrees to bewildered crowds of citizens. The texts of the edicts cited fabricated letters, supposedly discovered among the personal effects of the executed, which detailed bribery of legions and secret agreements with provincial governors. The lie was skillfully concocted, yet it failed to deceive everyone. The victims' relatives began a clandestine investigation, bribing slaves and questioning traders who had witnessed unusual troop movements on that fateful night. They gathered evidence that gradually formed a terrifying picture. Some even managed to retrieve items secretly kept by servants, blood-stained scraps of fabric, fragments of rings, strands of hair, by which the deceased could be identified. At the epicenter of the widespread indignation was Julia Domna, Caracalla's mother, who returned to Rome shortly after the tragic events. Her extensive network of informants, stretching from Alexandria to Antioch, meticulously reconstructed the events of that ill-fated morning. Every leaked detail undermined Macrinus's official version, a fact that did not escape the emperor's attention. His paranoia reached unbearable limits, culminating in the executions of those who dared to ask too many questions. Slaves and minor officials were killed merely on suspicion of having seen something. However, instead of strengthening his power, these maniacal actions merely highlighted his complicity in the crime. All Rome sensed the stench of blood emanating from behind the walls of the baths. Even though the marble once again shone, and every forcibly imposed silence only intensified suspicions. While Rome tried to comprehend the disappearance of 15 patricians, a plan was brewing in the shadows that was destined to determine Macrinus's fate. Julia Maesa, Julia Domna's sister and Caracalla's aunt, in exile in Emesa, Syria, coldly observed the blunders of the newly crowned emperor. Maesa was Macrinus's antithesis. While he ruled by fear and paranoia, she chose a path of patience and cold calculation. She had witnessed Caracalla's cruelty, his murder, and the subsequent massacre at the Baths, and she realized what had eluded many. Macrinus had made a fatal error. Typical of any usurper, he had destroyed his allies before consolidating his power. In those turbulent times, as the Roman Empire choked on political instability, the aristocratic families, deprived of their leaders, desperately needed a symbol, a figure capable of channeling their rage and restoring lost honor. Julia Maesa, a woman of exceptional intellect and ambition, was ready to provide them with this symbol. Her scheme revolved around young Varius Avitus Bassianus, her 14-year-old grandson, a priest of the Syrian deity Elagabal in Emesa. Maesa, acting boldly and riskily, began to spread the rumor that the boy was not merely a religious heir, but Caracalla's illegitimate son, a direct descendant of the Severan dynasty, which many in Rome continued to revere. This idea, like a spark in a powder keg, instantly spread throughout the city. For the humiliated aristocracy, young Bassianus became the embodiment of perfect revenge, Caracalla's blood against the usurper Macrinus, who had not only committed murder, but also destroyed those who had helped him ascend to the throne. Macrinus, immersed in his isolation, was yet unaware of the scale of the threat brewing against him. He believed the brutal massacre in the Baths had strengthened his power, but in reality it had merely sown the seeds of his inevitable downfall. Whispers in the forums grew bolder. It was said that the gods do not forgive innocent blood, and that Caracalla's ghost would return in the body of a new Caesar. What initially started as whispers quickly escalated into a powerful political movement, bolstered by military force. Julia Maesa was not merely inspiring the surviving patricians, she was skillfully buying the loyalty of soldiers. She understood perfectly that the army adored Caracalla, an emperor who personally participated in campaigns, sparing no expense on gifts and generous promises. Against this hero, Macrinus appeared merely a faceless bureaucrat, his hands stained with aristocratic blood, yet lacking the spark that ignited the hearts of legionaries. Rome stood on the brink of rebellion, and while the luxurious marble baths concealed the traces of the recent massacre in distant Syria, a devastating counterblow was already being prepared to send Macrinus into oblivion. Away from Rome's watchful eye, in the Syrian hills, Julia Maesa methodically transformed aristocratic indignation into a meticulously planned vendetta. The astute matriarch understood that rumors alone were insufficient. It was imperative to transform her grandson, Varius Avitus Bassianus, into a living political and spiritual embodiment of the adored Caracalla. The first step was the creation of a convincing myth. With the active involvement of the priests of Emesa's temple, she began to disseminate an artfully concocted story of a secret liaison between Caracalla and her daughter, the fruit of which was the young Varius. Although this version was impossible to verify, the legend perfectly met popular aspirations, the birth of a legitimate heir to the Severan dynasty, destined to avenge his father's death. Firstly, financial might was deployed. Julia Maesa, having amassed enormous wealth during her years of influence at court, directed streams of gold to centurions and tribunes whose hearts still remembered Caracalla's generosity. With each hefty sum, a mind-poisoning message was conveyed. Macrinus stole your emperor. My grandson will return him to you. The third, more sophisticated step involved drawing the widows and orphans of the patricians who had fallen victim to the massacre in the baths to Maesa's side. Where blood had been shed, Maesa offered protection and the promise of retribution. Each grieving family became another voice, spreading the news of Bassianus as an avenger. The propaganda campaign achieved remarkable success. Within a few months, the name of the young Bassianus all but vanished from the lips of soldiers and aristocrats, replaced by the title Antoninus, a direct evocation of Caracalla. In Rome itself, Macrinus began receiving alarming reports. Spy dispatches spoke of secret gatherings in Emesa, of tribunes deserting, and of gold coins bearing the image of a youth who had never set foot in the capital. In response, the emperor resorted to tried and tested methods, executions, purges, and confiscations. But it was already too late. The Syrian legions, weary of Macrinus's severity and captivated by the image of a Caesar with Caracalla's blood flowing through his veins, began swearing allegiance to Bassianus. News of this oath spread like wildfire throughout the empire. The rebellion gained momentum, and Macrinus, who sought to consolidate his power through mass executions, was about to face a far more formidable adversary: the memory of a deceased emperor embodied in a 14-year-old boy. In the spring of 218 AD, simmering discontent erupted into a full-blown storm of political turmoil. The legions stationed in Syria, those very units that had once marched into battle under Caracalla's banners, became the epicenter of the revolt. These battle-hardened veterans of Eastern campaigns became the secret recipients of Julia Maesa's emissaries, who arrived with chests full of gold and a cleverly spun tale that Caracalla lived on in his son, thirsting for vengeance. The impact of these speeches was immediate. Soldiers still vividly remembered the former emperor, whose cruelty was paradoxically coupled with unprecedented generosity towards them. Caracalla had showered them with gifts, promotions, and all manner of privileges, buying an affection that outlived his demise. Against this vibrant figure, Macrinus appeared merely a dry, soulless bureaucrat, incapable of inspiring genuine loyalty. The first spark of rebellion ignited in Raphania, a Syrian military camp, where tribunes openly swore allegiance to Bassianus, proclaiming him emperor under the name Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, in honor of Caracalla. The soldiers raised their standards, sprinkled their shields with the blood of sacrificial lambs, and proclaimed the new emperor's name with such fervor that their cries rang louder than any imperial edict. News of the coup spread like lightning. Within weeks, cohorts from Syria and Phoenicia joined the revolt, and some garrisons in Egypt began showing clear signs of sympathy. This was a direct, open, and audacious challenge to Macrinus's authority. Stunned by the lightning-fast spread of the revolt, the emperor attempted to respond with the customary brutality he had already displayed at the Baths of Caracalla. He ordered the immediate arrest of any senator or tribune who showed the slightest sympathy for Antoninus. The executions of alleged traitors in the forums were intended to instill fear in the hearts of Romans, but these harsh measures not only failed to extinguish the flames of rebellion, they instead merely added fuel to the fire. Meanwhile, Julia Maesa, like a skilled strategist, orchestrated the rebellion from the shadows. Every message, every rumor, every bag of gold sent from Emesa was aimed at solidifying the idea that Antoninus was the legitimate heir to the throne, and Macrinus a dishonorable usurper. Rome stood on the brink of an inevitable clash, an emperor consumed by paranoia, and a youth who had become a symbol of hope and vengeance. When these two forces met on the battlefield, the course of imperial history was set to change forever. On 8th of June 218 AD, the plains near Antioch were strewn with military standards. On one side stood Emperor Macrinus, leading an army of approximately 50,000 men, including the Praetorian Guard and loyal legions renowned for their impeccable discipline. On the other was an army seemingly inferior in numbers, yet lavishly funded by Julia Mesa's gold, inspired by faith in Antoninus, and fueled by nostalgia for Caracalla's era. The morning dawned, heralding tumultuous events. Soldiers understood that not only the fate of the imperial throne, but also the grandeur of Rome hung in the balance. Macrinus, clad in golden armor, stepped forward, aiming to inspire confidence in his troops. He was accompanied by commanders who had endured severe trials in the Mesopotamian campaigns. Yet his voice lacked the conviction that could fortify the army's resolve. Meanwhile, Antoninus, still a mere youth, rode in a chariot, surrounded by priests of Elagabalus, the sun god from Emesa. He addressed the soldiers not as a general, but as one chosen by the gods, promising that higher powers were on his side and that Rome would be delivered from the usurper. His words, echoed by the soldiers, reverberated across the battlefield like a mystical prophecy. The battle commenced with a fierce clash. Infantry lines met amidst the clamor of weapons and cries that shattered the morning silence. The Praetorians, trained in discipline, initially held their formation, but soon desertion began within their ranks. Entire cohorts, upon hearing Antoninus's name, cast aside their weapons and defected to the enemy. Macrinus, witnessing the disintegration of his army, desperately tried to maintain order, but panic proved stronger. The engagement devolved into a brutal massacre. Antoninus's supporters showed no mercy. Surrendering soldiers were ruthlessly slaughtered, and the bodies of the fallen littered the plain, testament to the accumulated fury. In the very crucible of the crisis, Macrinus took a fatal step that sealed his tragic end. He fled. Stripping off his military armor and donning the attire of a common merchant, he abandoned his soldiers to their fate and attempted to disappear on the dusty roads of Asia Minor. However, his escape was desperate and ill-conceived. Just 3 days later, a centurion recognized him in a modest inn and handed him over to soldiers still loyal to Antoninus. The end of the emperor's reign, the one who had ordered the bloody massacre in the Baths, proved surprisingly prosaic and devoid of any ceremony. He was swiftly executed by sword, without elaborate torture, without humiliating mockery, and without the inhumane cruelty he had inflicted upon his victims. Paradoxically, his death proved more merciful and just than what he had unleashed upon innocent individuals. His severed head, impaled on a spear, was sent to Rome as an ominous trophy. His headless body, cast into an unmarked grave, was consigned to oblivion, as befitted any despised criminal. Following Macrinus's death, Rome gained a new ruler, the young Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, barely 14 years old, who would later be known to history as Elagabalus. His ascension to the throne was immediate. Julia Mesa, the brilliant strategist behind this meticulously planned vengeance, presented him as Caracalla's illegitimate son. The lie was cleverly woven, but proved convincing enough to secure the loyalty of the legions, who still honored the memory of the murdered emperor. The populace, exhausted by political instability, accepted the new ruler without the slightest resistance. The Senate, humiliated and intimidated after the bloody massacre in the Baths, hastened to swear allegiance to the new princeps, hoping to avoid further reprisals. In the corridors of Roman nobility, Caracalla's name and the bloody events in his baths were uttered with caution. Despite public silence, the memory of the bloody massacre lived on in private conversations among patrician families. Every feast, every secret gathering in secluded villas served as a grim reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded amidst the marble walls. The echo of that slaughter forever altered the rules of the political game. The upper echelons of society realized that neither immense wealth, noble birth, nor the glorious deeds of ancestors could guarantee protection from imperial suspicion. Faith in the inviolability of imperial power was shattered, and this fissure in the elite's consciousness remained an unhealing wound for many years. Julia Maesa, for her part, calmly savored the fruits of her victory. She had not only avenged the death of her nephew Caracalla, but also elevated her grandson to the imperial throne. Thus, from the shadows, she transformed into the most influential woman in Rome. Nevertheless, the new regime was tainted from the outset by the bloodshed in the Baths. Despite the official narrative of conspirators being eliminated, popular memory held a different truth. Rome had witnessed an emperor's ability to ruthlessly eliminate members of the highest nobility, at least for a time. This served as an ominous reminder that blood spilled on the Caldarium's marble could not be entirely washed away, and that under fragile power any ally could instantly become an enemy. On that fateful night, tragedy unfolded. Ancient chroniclers immediately recorded the events. Herodian, a man at the epicenter of these occurrences, recounted the ominous silence that gripped the Eternal City after the horrific news of the mass slaughter. For him, this massacre in the Baths was undeniable proof that imperial power had transformed from a means of governance into an instrument of all-consuming terror. Decades later, Dio Cassius, one of the senators who miraculously escaped the bloody purge, described the events with a sense of bitterness and resignation. His works reveal a conviction that the Senate had lost all significance. "We were invited to feasts, only to end up as victims," he wrote, as if warning future generations. From then on, political decisions in Rome were made not in assemblies and debates, but in the shadows of palaces and in dungeons cleverly disguised as marble halls. The tragic events at the Baths of Caracalla, according to modern historians, served as an ominous harbinger of the great empire's impending decline. After that bloody massacre, every subsequent Roman emperor was poisoned by the virulent fear of inherited paranoia. The notion that yesterday's allies could, in an instant, become ruthless executioners became ingrained in the minds of the ruling elite, and Rome, while continuing to display military might, began inexorably to destroy itself from within, undermined by internal strife and suspicion. Today, tourists visiting the majestic ruins of the Baths of Caracalla in Rome admire the skillfully restored mosaics and monumental arches, testaments to past grandeur. Yet beneath these ancient stones lies a grim and brutal truth. On one April day in 217 AD, 15 of Rome's most influential aristocrats were, at the whim of a mad and suspicious emperor, reduced to disfigured, unrecognizable bodies. This story of the bloody slaughter in the baths is not merely a sorrowful page from a distant past. It is an enduring and stark reminder that absolute power needs no external enemies to self-destruct. All it requires is all-consuming paranoia, capable of obliterating everything in its path.